April 2nd, 1502. A 15-year-old boy is dying. His body burns from the inside. Sweat pours from his skin. His 16-year-old wife kneels beside him, whispering desperate prayers. 6 days ago, he was healthy. Now something is consuming him, and no one knows what. This is Prince Arthur Tudor, the boy born to be king. And when they finally opened his coffin centuries later, what they found made historians question everything. But here's the real question. What killed Arthur? Was it plague? A deadly virus? Poison? And what if he hadn't died that day? No Henry VIII, no 6 wives. No beheadings, no Reformation that ripped England apart. One mysterious illness, one twist of fate. One sudden death that rewrote 5 centuries of history. A gentle prince vanished. And in his place rose a tyrant who would tear England apart. Because Arthur's death planted a dark obsession in his family. An obsession with heirs that haunted the Tudors till death. If you love history mysteries like this, hit that like button right now. It really helps this channel grow. And share this video with other history lovers like you. Years before Arthur's birth, England was bleeding. 2 families had torn the country apart for decades. Lancaster and York both wanted the throne. Both believed God had chosen them to rule. They called it the Wars of the Roses. Thousands died in muddy fields. Brothers killed brothers, fathers watched sons fall. Then in August 1485 something unexpected happened. A man named Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian with a weak claim to the throne, faced the Yorkist king, Richard III, at Bosworth Field. Richard III charges across the battlefield. He's trying to reach Henry Tudor, kill him, end this rebellion with one stroke of his sword. But he never makes it. Henry VII became the king. The war is finally over, but England is broken. Exhausted, torn apart by decades of civil war. Nobody trusts anyone. The throne has changed hands so many times that no one truly believes it is safe. Not even the man who sits on it. Henry knew his power was fragile. His claim wasn't strong. His enemies were everywhere waiting. He needed to unite the 2 families. So he married Elizabeth of York, the niece of the dead king, daughter of Edward IV, sister to the missing princes in the Tower. A Lancastrian king, a Yorkist queen. Their marriage was political, but it was also necessary. And when Elizabeth became pregnant, almost immediately, Henry finally allowed himself to hope. Everything depends on this child. The baby arrived strong and healthy. People celebrated in the streets. Church bells rang across London. This wasn't just a royal birth. This was a promise, a new beginning. Arthur grew quickly. By age 3, he was made a Knight of the Bath, an ancient ceremony that involved ritual, bathing, all-night prayer vigils, and sacred oaths. 3 years old, he received more titles before most. Children learned to read: Duke of Cornwall, Prince of Wales, Earl of Chester. They dressed him in miniature armor, placed a tiny sword in his hand, let him down the River Thames on the royal barge, while crowds cheered from the banks. Everyone said the same thing: this boy will save England. But there was another boy in the nursery. Henry, born 4 years after Arthur in 1491. Henry was the spare, the backup, the one who didn't matter as much. Arthur studied with the best tutors in Europe. Henry played and practiced sword fighting. Arthur learned Latin, French, history, and philosophy. Henry learned to joust and hunt. Arthur was groomed to be king. Henry was groomed to exist. The brothers were close. They played together, laughed together, but everyone knew the truth. Only one of them would wear the crown. Arthur excelled at everything. His tutors marveled at his intelligence. He could debate in Latin. He understood complex philosophy. He loved history and could recite the reigns of English kings. From memory, he was also athletic, tall for his age, graceful, an excellent dancer who could entrance a room. His hair was red gold like his grandfather, Edward IV. His eyes were small but bright. His manner was gentle. One observer wrote that Arthur was the most loving and true prince. But being a prince wasn't just about being smart or kind. Arthur needed to secure England's place in Europe. He needed to marry in Spain. Two powerful monarchs ruled together. Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile had united their kingdoms through marriage. Now they were conquering the last Muslim territories. In Granada, building an empire. They had a daughter, Catherine, born in December 1485, just 3 months after Arthur. Henry VII saw an opportunity. An alliance with Spain would protect England from France. It would give the Tudor family legitimacy. It would show Europe that England mattered. Negotiations began when Arthur was barely 2 years old. The Spanish were interested. But cautious, was this Tudor dynasty stable? Or would it collapse like so many before it? For years, diplomats argued over details. Dowry amounts, marriage contracts, political guarantees. Finally, they reached an agreement. Arthur and Catherine would marry in August 1497. When Arthur was 10 years old, the betrothal became official 2 years later. They married by proxy, meaning representatives stood in for them during the ceremony. The real wedding would come later. But Arthur and Catherine began exchanging letters. They wrote in Latin they'd never met, but they were learning about each other through words. On parchment, Arthur wrote that he rejoiced at the thought of their marriage, that he felt deep affection for his future bride. Catherine wrote back with equal warmth. Two teenagers connected by politics, starting to feel something real. October 1501. Catherine of Aragon arrived in England. She was 16 years old. She traveled for months, across the sea and through foreign lands. She was nervous, excited, terrified. Arthur was 15, now tall, handsome, accomplished. They met for the first time at Dogmersfield. In Hampshire, accounts say Arthur greeted her warmly, that he would be a loving and true husband. 2 weeks later, on November 14th, 1501, they married at St. Paul's Cathedral. The Archbishop of Canterbury performed the ceremony. Nobles from across Europe attended. The celebration lasted for days. That night, their marriage bed was blessed by the Bishop of London. Then everyone left them alone. What happened in that room became one of history's most debated questions. Did they consummate the marriage? Years later, this question would tear England apart. It would end a religious era. It would cause deaths and wars. But on that November night in 1501, nobody knew any of this mattered. They were just two teenagers, married for political reasons, trying to figure out their future together. For a month, Arthur and Catherine lived at Tickenhill Manor in Worcestershire. Then in December, they traveled to Ludlow Castle. This fortress sat near the Welsh border. Strong walls, thick towers, beautiful chambers. This was where Arthur would learn to govern Wales, where he would prove himself worthy of the crown. Catherine joined him. Together, they established a household, hired servants, created routines. Arthur attended council meetings, made decisions, learned statecraft. Catherine supported him, learned English customs, wrote letters to her parents in Spain. For 3 months, everything seemed perfect. But something was wrong since the wedding. Arthur had been weaker, not dramatically, just tired more easily. Catherine noticed. So did the servants, but nobody worried too much. Arthur was 15, growing, working hard, of course. He was tired. Then March arrived, and with it death. Ludlow town had a problem. Disease moved through the streets. Some called it plague. Others blamed bad air or evil vapors. People were getting sick, some recovered. Many didn't. The disease crept closer to the castle. On March 27, 1502, Arthur collapsed. He burned with fever, his body shook. Sweat poured from his skin. Catherine fell ill the same day. They were both confined to their chambers. Servants brought food and water. Royal physicians examined them, prescribed herbs and bloodletting. Nothing helped. The disease they had was called the sweating sickness. Victims described it as feeling like their blood was boiling. Inside their veins, heat radiated from their bodies. Sweat soaked through their clothes. In minutes, many people became delirious. They didn't know where they were, couldn't recognize their own families. The sickness killed quickly. Some people died within hours. Catherine's body fought it slowly. Painfully, she began to recover. Arthur didn't for days. He suffered. The physicians tried everything they knew. Bleeding, purging. Herbal remedies, priests came to pray. Servants begged God for mercy. Catherine barely recovered. Stayed as close as they would allow. She wanted to be with her husband. But the disease consumed him from within. One contemporary described it as the deadly corruption did utterly vanquish and overcome the pure. And fretful blood, no medicine could stop it. No prayer could heal it. April 2nd, 1500. 2 dawn broke cold and gray over Ludlow Castle. Arthur Tudor died in his bed. He was 15 years old. He had been married less than 5 months. He was Prince of Wales his entire life. He was born to be the king. He would never be the king. The news had to reach the king. Messengers rode hard toward Greenwich Palace, where Henry VII and Elizabeth of York were staying. They arrived late Monday night. The king was asleep. His servants woke the king's confessor, a priest, and told him first. Early Tuesday morning, the priest entered the king's chamber. He dismissed the other servants. Then he quoted the Bible in Latin. Shall we receive good at the hand of God? And shall we not receive evil? Henry VII understood immediately. The priest told him, your dear son is departed to God. The king's grief was absolute. This wasn't just his son, this was his heir. His hope, the reason the Wars of the Roses had ended. Arthur's death meant everything was fragile again. Henry sent for his wife. They would face this together. When Elizabeth of York arrived and saw her husband's face, she knew, but Elizabeth of York was strong. She spoke calmly, deliberately. Remember your own life, she said. Remember your realm needs you. Your mother had only one child, you. God preserved you, God brought you to this throne. She continued, we still have Prince Henry. Strong and healthy, we have 2 beautiful daughters. We're both still young enough to have more children. She meant her words, gave Henry strength. She left his chamber, and then she broke in her own rooms, away from the court. Elizabeth of York collapsed with grief. She was a mother who had just lost her firstborn child. Her ladies-in-waiting panicked. They sent for the king. Henry VII rushed to his wife's side. Now he had to comfort her. They held each other and wept. Back at Ludlow Castle, there was work to do. Arthur's body couldn't simply remain in his bed. Medieval custom required specific preparations. First, the physicians removed his internal organs. This was standard practice for royal bodies that needed to be transported and preserved. They filled his body cavity with spices. Expensive spices, cinnamon, cloves, frankincense. These would mask decay and preserve the flesh. Then they wrapped him in cloth and placed him in a wooden chest. The chest was covered with black fabric. A white cross marked the top. They moved him to a chamber in the castle, placed him on a table covered with rich gold cloth. Silver candlesticks surrounded him. Wax tapers burned constantly. 4 large candlesticks with massive candles stood at the corners. For 3 weeks, the body remained there while arrangements were made. Meanwhile, Prince Henry, now aged 10, became the heir to the throne. The spare had become the most important person in England. If Henry died, the Tudor dynasty died with him. The pressure was crushing, and he felt every ounce of it. That weight planted in childhood would later shape the man he became. A king obsessed with heirs, terrified of failure, and willing to destroy anyone who stood in his way. April 23, 1502. St. George's Day instead of celebration. England mourned. Arthur's body was carried from the castle to St. Lawrence's Church. The procession was grand yet somber. Yeoman Indiana black and gold bore his coffin. Bishops walked beside them swinging incense. And the Earl of Surrey led the mourners. None of Arthur's family attended. Royal custom forbade it. 2 Spanish noblemen from Catherine's household walked behind, representing the young widow's grief. For 3 days prayers and masses filled the air. Arms were given to the poor. Arthur's heart, or perhaps his organs, were buried at St. Lawrence's. But the rest of his body still had one final journey to make. Worcester Cathedral. That's where English princes were buried. The journey from Ludlow to Worcester wasn't far. Maybe 30 miles, but it could have been 100. The body was placed on what the records call a chair. Likely a kind of chariot or cart, pulled by 6 horses. The horses were draped in black cloth. So was the chariot. Then the weather turned rain. Wind cold that cut through clothing. The roads became rivers of mud. The horses couldn't pull the weight. They had to bring in oxen to drag the chariot through the mud. The mourners walked through the storm, soaked and freezing, but they continued. One witness wrote the foulest cold, windy and rainy day I have seen. Even nature seemed to mourn. Back at court, Henry VII was shattered. He locked himself in his chamber, refusing to see anyone. Elizabeth of York comforted him, though her own heart was breaking far away. Catherine of Aragon mourned in silence. Only 16, newly widowed, and alone in a foreign land. She'd shared a brief, awkward marriage. Yet Arthur had been kind to her. Gentle now, the halls of Ludlow felt like a tomb. Servants later said Catherine would sit for hours, staring at the window, whispering prayers in Spanish. She'd lost her husband, her purpose, her future, and she didn't yet know. This tragedy would tie her forever to another. Tudor prince, meanwhile. Mourners were taking the body of her young husband away from her. After days of miserable travel, they reached Worcester Cathedral. The weather improved as they entered the city. Then came the burial. The Bishop of Lincoln sobbed as he cast holy water over the chest. Arthur's officers wept openly as they broke their staffs of office and threw them into the grave. One witness wrote, he had a hard heart that wept not. These men had known Arthur, served him, loved him. Now they were burying their prince. Finally it was time. Sir William Audley, comptroller of Arthur's household, took his staff of office. He held it over his head, snapped it in 2, threw the pieces into the grave. After his prince, Sir Richard Croft, steward of Arthur's household, did the same with his staff. The gentlemen ushers broke their rods of office and added them to the grave. Then the grave was filled with earth. Arthur Tudor, Prince of Wales, was gone, born September 1914, 86. Died April 2, 1502. Married less than 5 months, dead at 15. But Arthur's story didn't end there. Centuries later, scientists would make a shocking discovery beneath Worcester Cathedral. But we'll get to that later, because first you need to understand how his death changed the history of England. Arthur's death created ripples that spread across centuries. Remember Elizabeth of York's words to her husband, "We're still young enough to have more children." She meant them within weeks of Arthur's death. The 36-year-old queen was pregnant again, too old for the dangers of childbirth. She knew the risk, but took the chance. One last attempt to secure the Tudor line. One last hope for an heir, and despair. It was a desperate attempt to fill the void Arthur left behind. February 11, 1503. Elizabeth's 37th birthday. She went into labor and delivered a daughter. They named her Catherine after Arthur's widow. But something went wrong. Elizabeth of York died 9 days later. The baby followed her soon after. King Henry VII was destroyed in less than a year. He'd lost his firstborn son, his wife, and his peace of mind. The careful king turned fearful and cold, obsessed with control, with money, with survival. Every decision he made afterward came from one thing: terror of losing it all again. Henry VII had built everything on Arthur. The marriage to Spain, the promise of stability. The end of the Wars of the Roses. When Arthur died, the king, who had been shrewd, became paranoid. He hoarded gold. He saw enemies in every corner. He couldn't trust a world that had stolen his perfect heir. And 10-year-old Prince Henry watched it all unfold. One day you're the spare free to joust, to play. The next day your brother is dead. Your mother is dying, and the entire kingdom's survival rests on your shoulders. Henry VIII didn't just inherit a crown. He inherited a weight no child should carry. Years later, when Catherine of Aragon miscarried again and again, Henry saw more than dead infants. He saw Arthur. He saw his mother's death. He saw the fragility his father had feared. Each loss whispered the same message. The Tudors were cursed and without a male heir. Their dynasty wouldn't survive. Henry VIII's quest for a male heir became an obsession. When the Pope refused his divorce, Henry shattered centuries of tradition. He broke from Rome, made himself head of the church, dissolved monasteries, executed advisors who disagreed, including Thomas More. He married 6 times, 2 wives he beheaded. Religious violence consumed England for generations. Catholics and Protestants tore the country apart, all because a 15-year-old boy died in 1502. So what killed Arthur Tudor? For 5 centuries, people have debated this. The contemporary accounts described a malign vapor from the air, the sweating sickness, a disease that made victims feel like their blood was boiling. Modern historians have suggested tuberculosis, pneumonia influenza, the English sweating sickness that killed thousands in periodic outbreaks. Some even suggested testicular cancer, though that doesn't explain why Catherine got sick too. The truth is we'll probably never know. Medieval medical knowledge was limited. Descriptions were vague. All we know for certain is that something struck Arthur down in March 15th, 02, and 6 days later he was dead. In 2002, exactly 500 years after Arthur's death, scientists brought ground-penetrating radar to Worcester Cathedral. They wanted to find Arthur's remains. Arthur's body isn't buried in the beautiful stone tomb that visitors see. That's just a memorial. His actual body lies in a vault, beneath and slightly to the side of the monument. The radar showed a small space below the floor, a hidden chamber, and inside a solid object shaped like a coffin. The vault is filled with soil and rubble. Remember, Arthur was buried in a wooden chest. After 5 centuries, that wood is long gone. His bones are scattered in the dirt beneath the cathedral floor. The scientists didn't open the vault. That would require permission from a queen. But they confirmed he's almost certainly still there. The boy who should have been king resting in darkness. King Henry VII built Arthur's tomb in 1504. It's magnificent. A small chapel attached to the cathedral's choir. Elaborate buttresses, covered with carved figures in canopied niches. Pierced stonework creating windows. A rich parapet and pinnacles inside. The east end features elaborate tabernacle work. With more carved saints, the figures are mutilated now, probably damaged during the Protestant Reformation, under Edward VI, Arthur's nephew. But the tomb survived mostly intact. It's one of the most beautiful in England. A monument to hope that died too young. But imagine Arthur had lived. Imagine that mysterious disease had spared him. That Catherine recovered, and so did her husband. What would England look like? Arthur would have become king in 1509. Catherine would have been his queen. They would have had children. Sons, probably daughters. Arthur was described as gentle, educated, thoughtful, diplomatic. Would he have been a good king? A great one, we'll never know. But here's what probably wouldn't have happened. The break from Rome, the dissolution of the monasteries, the execution of Thomas More, the religious violence that tore England apart for a century. Henry VIII would have lived as a prince. Maybe he would have become Archbishop of York, as his father once planned. He never would have married 6 times, never executed 2 wives, never become one of history's most infamous tyrants. The Protestant Reformation in England might never have occurred, at least not the way it did. An America founded partly by English Protestants, fleeing religious persecution. That might be completely different too. One boy's death, one mysterious disease. Centuries of consequences. But Arthur did die, and his absence shaped the next 5 centuries. There's a plaque in St. Lawrence's Church in Ludlow, marking where Arthur's heart may be buried. Tourists visit Worcester Cathedral and admire its beautiful tomb. Historians debate what killed him, but Arthur's death itself remains a mystery. The boy who should have changed everything. The boy whose death changed everything instead. So if you could go back to 1502 and save Arthur's life, knowing it would erase Henry VIII, the English Reformation, and possibly even change how America was founded, would you do it, or are some tragedies necessary for history to unfold the way it should?